one really good thing about me, or maybe bad thing, I don't know, depends who you are, is I'm a little outspoken. Virtual audits is something I really don't like. They claim that whoever they are, they're in Boston, but they can go and do an energy audit on not any building, but a lot of them without any people being present. They just take interval data, get an address so they can take a Google picture. Oh, they'll make a phone call and ask a lot of questions, do you have chilled water or do you use package units, I guess? And then they'll produce an audit. I've seen many of these virtual audits. They're not very impressive, and I wrote a paper on it, and I give the positives and negatives, and that's what this presentation is about. All right, well, let's get started. So I actually first made this webinar, or not webinar, I wrote a paper on this and gave a talk, I think like 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. Things have changed a little bit, but pretty much some of it's the same. And well, let's just get going. So let me see if I can get my controls going here. There we go. So some of this, first off, a lot of you, or maybe all of you, are people from ESCOs, and ESCO people know this already, but I'll just mention it anyway, because this actually is related to virtual audits. Energy efficiency, it seems like a no-brainer. You know, you just go get an energy audit, or have your engineers do an energy audit, you install the projects, everything works fine. The customer saves energy, everybody's happy. It just seems so easy theoretically, but there just are so many places where it doesn't work. It's hard to do things right, let's say, because I guess, well, we've been in the business so long, we've seen all the problems, but you can have an audit where they just didn't do very well, and they missed the good energy conservation measures, or they recommended the wrong ones. Or maybe they didn't describe them well, and the contractor then installed it totally wrong, or the savings estimates were wrong. I've seen some big disasters that way, or the costing's wrong. I've been guilty of that sometimes. Or the installations aren't that good, as I mentioned, and everything works, but they never commissioned the retrofit. So yeah, it works, but it doesn't save energy. And then finally, well, I guess that's the last one. But there's all these different ways that these projects can go wrong. And virtual, if you use virtual audits in your, let's say, process of doing energy projects, you're probably going to trip up on just about every one of these. But let's see what we got. So audits. Energy audits, that's what my company does. It's our bread and butter, but it's not all great. I mean, there are problems with audits, and I guess we should mention them, and you probably already know them anyway. If I asked you what are the problems or what the customers not like, I bet you can come up with all these answers. One, they're expensive. And I mean, they're expensive sometimes. If you're going to save $1 million, then a $40,000, $50,000 audit maybe isn't expensive, but it seems expensive to the client because all they get is a stack of paper, right? Audits take time. They take the time from the facility operator, who, as it is, they're already overburdened. And then the other thing is, suppose you had a lot of buildings. Let's say you owned all the let's say all the McDonald's in the country, and for some reason, I don't know why you'd do this, but you wanted to do an energy audit of all of them. You're not going to use one company. You'd have different auditing companies. They'd all have different formats. And not only that, each auditor would actually have different specialties and find different types of measures or make different recommendations. And so this is also kind of an issue, is that audits have different levels of quality, different formats. And then it's hard to aggregate all this data. So you get all these different audits, different formats, and how do you put it all into one? Those are big problems with traditional audits. That's what this next slide is. It's all written right there. You don't need to read it. But an aside about this talk is you're going to see a lot of words. I hate words on slides, and I've done it. Words are distracting. So just skim them, and maybe I'll point to what is important, but try not to read them too much. Okay, so how do these virtual audits work? Well, basically the way it works is they use interval data. Interval data meaning the 15-minute reads, more or less. I mean, it could be different, could be 5-minute, but generally 15-minute reads from smart meters of kilowatt hours. If they've got gas data, I mean, let me say it differently. First Fuel was, which I'll talk about a little bit later, they were the first ones to really make the virtual audits popular and to market it. And what they were doing is they just take the electricity data, so it's this interval data, 5-minute reads, and if you had gas bills, they would take it, gas bills. I don't think they took gas interval data. I don't know if they even had it, but if you didn't have gas bills, well, they just do without it. They needed the address of the building so they could take a look, Google Maps, and get an idea of what's on the roof. Is it package units? Is there a chiller plant, etc.? And they would do a survey with the facility operator. They'd talk to them on the phone and ask them a series of questions about the equipment, scheduling and controls, and what kind of problems they have. Excuse me. And yeah, it would be either on the telephone or a web survey. I think with the government, with GSA, they were doing web surveys. And then they would present the results to the client on a conference call or online, and then and aggregate the results online. And the results were, unfortunately, I don't have any of them here, but they're beautiful, and they're so beautiful. They put audits to shame. With all the graphs, they have heat maps and all this other stuff, all these really cool looking graphics. It's just pretty. And it's also, assuming the input data is good, really useful. If you had, 100 stores and you had these virtual audits of all of them, you can look and say, oh yeah, well, of all my stores, I'm paying this much. I'm paying $6.2 million in lighting for all, that's pretty neat, assuming the data was correct. So the strengths are, it is less expensive. It's really cheap. It doesn't require much time at all from the facility staff. They don't need to, get keys, get ladders, open up the mechanical rooms and then wait around while you're, writing stuff down, taking pictures. The audits are done really quickly, and thousands can be done in the same format. And as I mentioned, the online aggregation is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So the companies that really popularized this in the beginning were Retroficiency and First Fuel. They're both venture capital startups. My experience with venture capital startups is, one, they have strong marketing departments. They make a lot of claims that aren't true. And number two, they usually fail. But these two didn't. So Retroficiency is actually got bought by Engie, and so they made it. And First Fuel has made it also. They were really big into virtual audits, and that's how they did a lot of marketing on virtual audits, as you're going to see actually in the next few slides. But now they're doing other stuff, which is not so much virtual audits anymore. And the stuff they're doing is probably very valuable. The clients for these virtual audits have been utility programs, federal government, mostly GSA and the Department of Defense. So GSA, well, I don't know if you know, but the federal government has this requirement. I'm probably going to butcher all these numbers, but I think it's like 75% of the buildings have to be audited every 4 or 5 years. I should know because we've done a lot of them, but I don't know. And yeah, so it was an unfunded mandate though. They never, the feds, the government never gave, or Congress never gave money to get this done. And so GSA has all these huge buildings. They're office buildings, 1 million square feet or above. They're all over the country, and especially in DC, and they don't have the money to get really good audits done that cost, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 each, when they can pay First Fuel what, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000, and that's what they were doing. They loved it. It was an easy way to get this done. It was fast. It was all in the same format, everything I mentioned. Here are some of the articles. Now look, see, this is 2013. I'm not looking you don't need to read it, just you can read the top, the headline's good enough. So this is First Fuel, and they were doing Washington, DC, the city of DC, and they did 25 buildings here. So they found 24% savings. Here's one, retroefficiency. They won a military contract for virtual audits, 2013. I think it was the same author, right? No, different author. And they're both, actually both these companies are based in Boston. Yeah, so the military was pretty interested in doing this. I'll just leave it at that. Here's another one. This is 2014, Eliza Wood, so same author. 300 buildings, GSA. So these are the big GSA buildings now that are not getting real energy audits anymore. It really cut into our business, actually. But anyway, so they were using the First Fuel, and they were, a lot of the people, I mean, there was some controversy in the federal government about virtual audits and all, and I'll talk about that later, but some of the folks in GSA were very happy with this. So this is what one person said, who's right, let's see, oh, it doesn't say. Oh, Brian Wright, a senior mechanical engineer at GSA. He said there's little difference in the findings between the two audits. So they had real audits and virtual audits. He said they're the same. It was so incredibly close. Anyone who says you can't do it either doesn't understand how in-depth First Fuel gets or has some other reason for wanting to contest it. Well, I would be the guy who has some other reason for wanting to contest it because I want to do the audit myself. But we'll look a little further because I am going to contest it. Here's another one, 2013. So this is all a long time ago. So the Sarah says, so she worked for Enernoc, and Enernoc actually has some kind of virtual audit technology. I don't know much about it. Actually, I know almost nothing about it. But she said, look, it's 80-20. You know, you do 20% of the labor or the effort, and you get 80% of the results. Well, maybe that's true. So that's what she's saying. Okay. So yeah, I mentioned already these two companies, Retroefficiency got bought by Engie. Engie's bought all kinds of companies, like Optera, they bought them, and they bought, oh no, now I'm forgetting the other companies. I forgot the other ones they bought, but they've become a really big company. First Fuel is now, as I mentioned, doing analytics, really advanced analytics for utility programs, and you know what? I bet they're doing really good work. But virtual audits, I have a bone to pick with. But let's talk about what's going on today. So the virtual audits idea was pioneered by those two companies, and they did a lot of marketing, especially First Fuel. They did so much marketing. They were very effective at getting sales. And then, you know, I contacted a guy who just left First Fuel, and I asked him, you know, I haven't seen much on, you know, for press releases for virtual audits lately. Are you still doing this? And he said, no, not so much anymore. We're really doing advanced analytics now. And it's like virtual audits, well, I don't know if that was the plan, but it proved to be like a foot in the door. And now they're doing probably very valuable work for these utilities. But First Fuel, not really doing them so much anymore. Retroefficiency, I know one program, one big utility company that does utility programs all over the country. They use retroefficiency as these virtual audits, but having worked with these programs in two different areas, so I worked, Abraxas has worked doing, you know, audits and retro commissioning for these utility programs. And both of the program managers have told us, oh, this is just garbage. It's something we have to do because we put it in a proposal. I mean, they don't give it any credence. They think it's, and actually the clients themselves who got them said, this is just garbage. I can't believe this. But you know what? I asked Nexon, are you still, oh, I guess I mentioned their name. Are you still planning on using this? And I guess they are. So it's still being used and will be used in the future. But there seems to be a new, new bit of a new generation, that's my guess, of virtual audits. And this is something that's new here, right here. So this is Case Western University. They did some, I guess, some research. And I thought there's an interesting quote down here at the bottom. Most current energy audits involve going to building, performing leak tests, infrared imaging, blower door tests, and other procedures. Well, I don't know. I don't know how many of you have done those things, but that's not really so true with commercial. But whatever. So the Department of Energy gave them a grant, $1.3 million, and JCI is licensing this tool for the year. And so JCI said that this is going to reduce the time to perform building audits. You know, it's going to be great. And yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, I doubt JCI will be doing it for the performance contracting. This will probably be some add-on service. You know, JCI is such a huge company. The left side doesn't know what the right side's doing. That's how it is with all these big companies. So, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Then there's this other thing. Now, this was hard to get any information on. So virtual audits, this is a different virtual audit thing, and I didn't yellow anything here. But so I have the 3 steps. So the first one was get the address measurements. I thought that was interesting. Square footage and exterior photos. Then this software that they have is going to make a 3D model of the building, and it will use weather, electrical, and utility data and simulate building consumption. I think, so this is done by Autodesk. And Autodesk, they own AutoCAD, and I think that's related to the some of these building modeling programs. So I think somehow they're going to make some building model that's going to estimate savings. So that's what I got. And so the Air Force is apparently taking a look at it. Okay. Oh, and so one thing I brought up, I wanted to see who wrote this. I've been looking for these authors to see if I can go talk to these folks. And so Jackie Davis was the one that wrote the last one. She also writes on social marketing. So a lot of, you know, one thing I've learned, I guess I'm older and I'm more cynical, but a lot of writers are writers. They're not energy experts. Like the people I'm speaking to are energy experts. You guys have so many layers of knowledge about energy, and you've seen successes and failures and all this other stuff. Writers don't have that. And that's just why I brought this up. Okay, so let's talk about virtual audits and their weaknesses. I mentioned the strengths, and the strengths are actually great. They're inexpensive, they're fast, same format, and beautiful, beautiful graphics where you can aggregate everything together. Those are incredible strengths. Weaknesses, well, here they are. I'm not going to read them. Let's just go over them one by one. So the interview. So the problem with the interview is, if you've done a lot of energy audits, you know that when you interview the facility person, whoever that is, they often don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes they know everything and they're super sophisticated and they know a lot more than you know, not just about the building, but about everything. That happens, absolutely. But there's a lot of times when they don't know anything. Either they're new to the building, maybe they're doing an energy audit because the old person retired, right? And so now they want to, you know, try to set things right. So they got this new guy who doesn't know anything. Sometimes they're not technically proficient. They started as a janitor and pretty soon they're running the building. Or the person you want to speak to is not available, or, you know, and nobody knows the equipment. That happens. Or there's times when there's a psychological stuff too, right? When you go and do these energy audits and you're doing the interview, sometimes they're going to say what they think you want to hear. Oh yeah, we're really efficient. Yeah, we do everything really efficient here. I mean, they say that stuff. Why? Because they don't want to look bad. I mean, really, if you think about it, you go and do an energy audit and you find like 20 things that they can do to be more energy efficient. And how come these guys who are at the building all the time didn't come up with that stuff? You know, that's how they're seeing it. It's like, you know, hey, you're running things at the wrong temperatures. Well, why didn't my guy do it? Because he's a loser. I mean, it's like they see it as this is threatening, and you're going to point out all the ways that I'm a really crappy building manager. And so some of them, they're gonna lie. They're gonna leave things out. They're gonna say what they think you want to hear. So you don't really get the full truth a lot of times. And then there's guys that just think it's a waste of time, and they, you know, and some of them will throw in the whole political thing, right? If you're into energy efficiency, then you're a lib, and maybe they're really conservative, and then they don't like you. There's all that stuff too, right? So yeah, there are problems with the interview. So one of the things though is that these virtual audits, a lot of it is based on the interview. I would say more than 50% of it. It's not like the virtual audits where they just, they don't just take data, run it through their program, and then they have all these recommendations. They actually hired a lot of good ESCO engineer types to go and look at the data and come up with their own recommendations. They had real humans behind it. So it wasn't just some automated process. Okay, so another weakness is they're not going to find root causes of problems, and sometimes energy audits aren't either, right? But here's an example. We have, let's say I'm not even convinced that they can do it, but let's say they identify with their interval data, they're not bringing in enough outside air. I don't think not bringing in enough. They have economizer issues. Let's say they can identify that. I'm not convinced they can, but maybe they can. Well, why are they not bringing in enough air, free cooling air, right? Well, here's a case of, well, they've overridden the outside air damper to closed. Well, that's one reason. Or maybe the controls are written so that it won't work. Or maybe the temperature sensors are wrong. Or maybe, this is two different cases. So on the left, the actuator isn't connected to the shaft that opens and closes the dampers. That's on the left. Or on the right, they got a 2x6 in the dampers to keep them open all the time. Could be. Or maybe, the actuator, it's really old and all the wires are pulled out and it's just stuck in place. And the dampers are stuck anyway. Could be that. Or maybe the actuator is hitting the wall. I mean, there's all these different reasons, right? That you're not getting, here's another one. Not enough outside air. I mean, yeah, everything seems to be working except for, when they could be doing free cooling, it's 55 degrees outside and you don't need to turn your chillers on. Well, maybe there isn't enough outside air that's ducted into the building. Well, that could be the problem, and really has nothing to do with the equipment or how it's running. It's just that was the design. And then there's this on top of it. So this is a building that I worked on, and they had, I think, like 80 air handlers, right? So let's say that this virtual audit, this analysis recognized, there's a problem with economizers. Okay, which air handlers? Which ones? Is it all of them? How would it know? It doesn't know. Well, which ones? It doesn't know. So all they can say is there's a problem with economizers. What are you going to do with that? You got 80 air handlers. It could be any of a lot of different problems. Here's another one. There's too much cooling usage in a building. Well, I'm not going to read all these, but these are a lot of reasons why there could be too much cooling usage. There's a lot of reasons. All right, another weakness, a really limited list of measures. I've seen several audits. This is actually, I guess that's about average. Forget the implementation cost, simple payback. Just look at the ECM names, right? I've got four. Here is a study that was done, I don't know. They did some pilot study, right? A Better City, they got a grant or whatever. They did 9 properties, I'm sorry. 5.1 million square feet, that's a lot. And let's count the number of ECMs here. 10, 16, 18. 9 properties, 18 different ECMs. Nice, right? That's it. That's what I'm saying. They don't really recommend a lot. This is an audit that I did a while back. I like to find a lot of stuff. And maybe it's the 80-20, right? Some of these are dumb, like look at number 20. What am I gonna say? $1,000, who cares? So maybe for 80-20, they're right, and look at number 18, save $112, who cares? So yeah, maybe. Here's another thing that they're not gonna notice. This was actually pretty funny. Unfortunately, you can't see the color very good. That's green. So you see these red coils, and then right below it, there's a pool of water where it was green. And if you put your finger in it, it's thick and syrupy, right? And that's always there. It was really disgusting. And I'm sure super unhealthy. It's not going to capture this either. A virtual audit's not going to notice that. oh, they're not using filters and their coils are clogging up. It's not going to find steam leaks. And let's say they even did say, well, we think you guys are using too much steam. Maybe there's a leak somewhere. Yeah, but where is it? Well, if you have a guy on site or a person on site, you can take a picture of it and say, it's right here. It's not going to notice, look at this, I got clean filters below and dirty filters up top. And the air is going around the filter up top too. I was in an air handler here. This was really disgusting. I just wanted to, I was inside of it and I just wanted to see, is green. You can't see it very well, but it's greenish gray. And I just wanted to know, is that wet? And so I put my finger on it and it was wet, right? And then I thought, this is really disgusting and dangerous. I have to make sure I wash my hands before I touch my face. And next thing I know, within a minute, I've licked my fingers. It's just totally disgusting. But I was okay, I didn't get sick. Oh, here's a funny thing. These are Venmisers they had, but they actually, the soda, the people who provide the soda and fill the machines didn't like them. So they actually plugged the Venmiser into itself and bypass the whole thing. You're not going to capture that in a virtual audit. So basically, what am I trying to say? A limited list of measures. You're not going to capture a lot of things in a virtual audit because you're not there seeing them. And then another one, the measure descriptions. Here's something from Retroefficiency. Look at the details on the right. That's their measure description, right? That's it. That's it. Okay. This is what we do. I don't know, what is this? This is a static pressure reset on VAV air handlers. Oh, I guess that's probably one they would never do anyway. So it shows which air handlers. It explains how the system, how it works. So what does static pressure reset mean, and it explains what kind of logic should be implemented in the retrofit. So that's an audit. An audit is expert guidance. That's the bottom line down there. The whole point of an audit is we want to help the clients so that they can save energy. It's not just, yeah, that's what it's all about. So there's just more pages, the same thing. So this explains how it would operate and all of that. So what we're recommending, how it works, and references. Geez, you can go read some papers from ASHRAE. Okay, more weaknesses. So another one is the pricing. So how are you going to price? Let's go back to that economizer example I had before, right? So you have 80 economizers. You know there's an economizing problem. Is it possible they just overrode all the dampers? If so, boy, you have 80 of them. Maybe you can get them all fixed for $4,000 or maybe even $2,000, right? Or maybe all the dampers, actuators are broken and you need to replace them all. Or maybe all the dampers are frozen in place and rusted shut and you need to replace them all. I mean, that could be a lot more expensive. So how do you price that? That's very difficult. And I don't know how these people do this. I mean, I just don't think you can do it. So that's a big issue. And then another one. So this is something I alluded to initially. These contractors, these people that implement, install things like the drives or the actuators and all that other stuff, they are not energy efficiency experts. You are. And if you go and give them a 2 or 3 sentence scope of work, they're probably not going to end up doing it right, or at least what you intended. They're not going to implement it in a way that saves energy. It might work, but it might not save energy. You might have a VFD that can ramp the fan up and down, but it's not responding to the static pressure sensor because you didn't mention it. So that's a big problem. You really need, a good audit needs to be very clear on what needs to be done. All right, so some conclusions. These audits are fast, they're cheap, they're hassle-free, absolutely. Great aggregation results, great web interface. But the best ECMs, I believe, are not found. I think the best ones are controls ECMs, things like static pressure reset. They're things where they're very inexpensive and they can save you quite a lot of energy. They're not going to be found. The client might not end up implementing the best ECMs, implementing less best ECMs, and then they like left all this money on the table, right? These things can't estimate savings or costs accurately. And how do you prioritize which ECMs to implement when you really don't know the payback? There's a huge range. Is it 0.1 years or is it 60 years? I don't know, because I don't know what it's going to cost. Yeah, and because the ECMs aren't really, the descriptions aren't written well, we don't know, the contractor might not be able to understand what needs to be done, and they have to make it up. And that means you might have problems. So back to this, where does energy efficiency break down? Well, I mentioned, we talked about that before. I'm not going to read this again, but pretty much in every case, all of these, all of that, virtual audits breaks down. So I guess this is my conclusion. Let me look, I think that's my last page. Yes, it is. So look, when it comes to energy audits, and you all know this, but I'm going to say it again anyway. What energy audits are, it's not a stack of paper. It's not a procedure. It's thoughtful expert guidance. This is what we do. We're professionals. We've been doing it for years. We've seen hundreds or thousands of buildings. This is what we do. And so if you have a poor energy audit, the client is going to make poor energy efficiency decisions, leave money on the table from missed ECMs, or pursue, use their energy efficiency budget on subpar ECMs. Virtual audits are fast, less expensive, but it's not good for the industry. And I think that's about all I have. I'm going to go check out and see what we got for questions here.
One of the other things I wanted to do, John, and we haven't really done this in the past. I know we get general questions, but if anybody on this webinar wants to give their thoughts or their feedback on just the topic in general, you can send that to as well to that webinars@abraxasenergy.com, and we can go back and forth over it, or just want to kind of open the conversation on that. So,
Tyler, tell us what's next.